With that, and I know Becky gave me a little bit of an intro, and some of you already know me, so I'm just quickly going to reintroduce myself. But I'm Maggie Shaw, and I'm the food program and kitchen manager for Felicity House. And I talk about food all the time. I've done lots of demos since we started virtual programming. So I'm always very excited about talking about a food topic. And every time we do these great food lectures, I learn something new. So I'm really excited about presenting today's topic. I want to give you guys just a brief overview of what to expect during the event. We're going to talk about the origins of Italian pasta specifically, the cultural importance of pasta, and then we're going to do a live demo of pasta making where we're going to make 3 different types of pasta shapes. So let's get started. So I think the most important thing that we need to talk about here is noodles versus pasta. And they're 2 very different things. So when we do our lecture today and we're talking about pasta, we're very specifically talking about pasta and not noodles. So the difference between pasta and noodles is that they're created with totally different ingredients and they actually use totally different techniques. So noodles can be made from a variety of different kinds of flour, and they're formed into an unleavened dough and then rolled out into flat sheets and sliced. Pasta is different. Pasta is made with semolina flour, which is a type of wheat, and it is a dough that's made into a variety of different shapes. So you might know pasta in spaghetti form, but there is also, as we just discussed, over 600 other types of shapes that it comes in. And so that's really what makes pasta so fascinating and different. The other thing is the way that pasta and noodles get cooked is also largely different. So depending on the type of dish, noodles usually have varying degrees of firmness and softness. Pasta technically is always supposed to be cooked al dente, which means at the tooth. And what that means is it has a little springback to it. Whereas noodles can be mushy, they can be soft, they can be crunchy, they can be many, also major cultural differences. So noodles that are Italian noodles really is going to be more pasta, but those are fresh and dry, are always cooked at the same temperature, al dente, which I said before. Whereas other noodles, which are typically Asian in their nature, are a variety of textures, different ingredients and shapes. Asian noodles might be made with rice flour or vegetables or egg or sometimes even seafood. Maybe you've seen like black squid pasta, super cool. And as I said, but depending on the dish, they can be prepared totally differently. So let's talk a little bit about some of the origins of pasta, because when we're talking about the difference between noodles and pasta, I think it's really important to talk about the history of where things have come from, so we understand a little bit more about where pasta kind of came from and what that all means. So I think we're actually one slide back, Becky. There we go. So pasta is actually one of the most accessible foods in the world, and believe it or not, even outside of Italy, almost every country has some kind of version of pasta in a similar manner because it's such an inexpensive staple. So for instance, in Germany and Hungary, they have something called spätzle, which is a very similar product to pasta, and it's cooked in a similar way, but it's just a very simple dough that's rolled and then boiled and served with sausages and things like that. In Poland, they have pierogies, which I actually had for dinner tonight. They're super delicious. And it's a similar type of thing. It's sort of like a dough, and then it's filled with mashed potatoes and other types of delicious things like cheese. Ashkenazi Jewish families make dumplings. And in America, we obviously love pasta, so we have kind of incorporated that into our own culture here. But believe it or not, even though we always think of pasta as being Italian, it comes from places much further away than Italy. The ancient history of pasta is almost impossible to know exactly where it came from, just because it's kind of prior to before record keeping was really being done. So everything that we know about pasta is just from whatever written records we can find. We have found that there are recipes that go back in Italian cookbooks as early as the 1200s. But we also know that there, as Becky said before in her earlier slide, there have been documented evidence from archaeology and things like that that dates pasta way before that. But pasta has always been super popular. English noblemen actually toured Italy in the 18th century and brought pasta back with them, which is what largely compelled it to come to the United States. And it was in the United States at that point, but it didn't really actually gain any popularity until Thomas Jefferson sort of made it a popular thing. He really enjoyed macaroni. So if you know the song Yankee Doodle, that's also why they're referring to macaroni. But we have a great little clip that we can talk a little bit more about some of the pasta origins. Becky, we're going to go to the next slide. And the history is super varied, as much as the shapes and the types. And there, believe it or not, history historians continue to argue that there are so many different places where pasta initially came from that nobody necessarily agrees on one specific place. It is agreed upon that pasta initially came from Asia, although there are some sources that it came from the Middle East, and then people who are historians of the Middle East say that that's where pasta started. So there's no like one agreement about it. So let's take a look at this clip. We're going to look a little bit at this quick clip called The Secret History of Pasta. And we're going to just talk quickly about some of the origins. You guys get a little view of that.
Oh, pasta, so rich, so steamy, so seductive. But listen, before I get too hot under the colander, let's get one thing straight. Pasta is old, like super old, like super, super old. Well, maybe not that old, but really, where did this stuff come from? Let's find out together in The Secret History of Pasta. The most common origin story claims pasta was brought to Italy from the east by the explorer Marco Polo. I got some bad news. It's not true. Sorry, pal. It is true a dumpling like pasta existed in China as early as 1700 BCE, but other forms of pasta existed in Italy before Marco Polo ever left, like a baked, doughy pasta called lagane, an ancestor to lasagna. So, much like a bowl of delicious angel hair, the ancient world is a seemingly endless tangle of competing pasta threads. But if we slurp our way to the bottom, what's the real pasta predecessor? The answer takes us to the 5th century, where merchants from the Arab world brought dried noodles known as itria, packed for long journeys across the Silk Road, bringing pasta to Sicily centuries before Marco Polo. But once pasta was here, what did Italians bring to the table? What was their special sauce? The sauce. Up until this point, pasta was eaten plain, or even as a paste. Italy also invented mass pasta production, including the creation of the first pasta machines. But if you think the story's over, there's one little detail left. At the time, even the wealthiest, most aristocratic members of society ate pasta like this. Yeah, with their bare hands. And with tomato sauce on the horizon, you can just imagine. But thankfully, there was a hero waiting in the shadows. Forks had never been big in Italy, but this was a match made in heaven. So if you love chowing down on spaghetti, it might be better to thank your fork rather than Marco Polo. It took an awfully long time to become what it is today, but there's plenty to go around. Just hey, hands off that last meatball, okay? Now it's mine.
That video, I think it's so funny. Okay, so the other part of this that is a really important thing to talk about is not just where pasta came from, but once pasta became popular, it exploded. And in Italy especially, it just became like a commonplace. But not only that, it was really a means for people to express themselves culturally, regionally, as well as in the kitchen. And so, you know, it's really fascinating to look at some of the names and shapes of these pieces. Becky, do you want to jump back to the PowerPoint? So this is just a few examples, and I know we've mentioned this number many times, but there's so many different types of shapes and pastas. These are some that I thought we'd be a little bit more familiar with some of the pronunciations and where the regions are, where they're from. But these actually have a lot of important implications. So some pasta varieties are uniquely regional and not widely known, and many types have different names based on region or language. So it's certainly possible that two people from two different regions could be making the same pasta and call it totally different things. And I just thought that was so interesting. And a large reason that that is because it's interesting, but it also is a way for people to just kind of show off cool techniques that they know. Manufacturers and cooks often invent new shapes of pasta or rename existing shapes for marketing reasons. So there's so many different reasons why pastas have the shapes and names that they do. Italian pasta names often end with masculine plural suffixes or feminine plural endings, meaning little or big, and other suffixes like oti or aci, which have to do with the size or the quality of the pasta, whether something's like rough or smooth. And believe it or not, in Italian, all pasta names are plural. So that's kind of an interesting fact. The shapes are also an incredibly important thing. Becky, if you want to switch to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. So the culinary and cultural implications of the different shapes of pasta. So different regions have different shapes. Before Italy was a united country, there were many smaller regions that operated independently from one another, and all made up names based on a variety of cultural factors. So one reason why pasta shapes are the way that they are is they work with different types of sauces. And so that is a very practical reason. And so the sauces largely are dictated by the local ingredients to the region too. And so that's where the shape and then ultimately the sauce that complements the pasta really is a beautiful, intimate view into that particular culture as far as what they're growing and how they're harvesting and the type of wheat that they're using for their pasta. So when you're eating pasta, especially in Italy from a particular region, you are really eating history in a lot of ways. It's very cool. The different curves and ridges in pasta shapes are designed to hold heartier sauces, and then longer, thinner pastas go better with lighter sauces like cream sauces or just something that's smooth. So all of these pasta shapes are made with a machine. So they're actually forced through little dials and then cut and then dried. Obviously you see that these shapes are really complicated because if we didn't have machines to do this, and as you'll see later when we do the demo, it's pretty laborious to make pasta. So you can see that like one person just making, 15 bow ties is enough for one single person to eat a meal. So it's certainly a great thing to know that there's a process to this that makes it possible for easier making of pasta. So let's go ahead and look at this clip in the next slide. And it's going to show us a little bit about how different shapes get made, handmade versus machine made. And this is actually a company based right here in Brooklyn, New York, which is pretty cool. Becky, do you want to pop that? That should be the second video.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We want to really support the local grain community here in New York.
Every day for lunch I have pasta.
And so it's definitely a very different process when you see a machine doing it. Obviously, can produce so much at such a quick amount of time. And so the pasta we saw being produced in the machine, that's what we're most familiar with. When you go to the grocery store and buy pasta, you're getting pasta that was made in a machine, and while it's still using all the same simple ingredients, it's just mass produced so that we can all enjoy pasta without having to sit and make 1,000 rotini over hours and hours. The other thing that I think is sort of an interesting part of pasta, that not just the sizes or the shapes or the names, but there's actually very specific instructions as far as within the Italian culture, as far as how people feel that you should cook the pasta too. So let's do a little exploring about that, and let's talk about this slide. So you're going to cook different pastas different ways. So fresh pasta versus dried pasta, you're going to obviously cook differently. Dried pasta is going to cook a little bit faster than soft pasta, but believe it or not, there's a very small window of when perfect pasta is supposed to happen. But I think the easiest way is I have a step-by-step guide. You want to use as much water as possible when you're cooking your pasta. You want to just salt the heck out of it. You want it to be equivalent to, a lot of people have described it as tasting like seawater because it's so salty. But the more you flavor your water, the better your pasta is going to taste. And then you just keep tasting and tasting and tasting until your pasta is perfectly al dente. And what that means is it's not squishy. It's not hard. It's kind of right in between. It just has a little bite on your tooth, and that's it. Those, I think, are some of the most important rules of thumb when you're thinking about cooking your pasta. Now, if you're cooking fresh pasta, like some of the ones that we're going to make today, they're going to cook very fast, maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And that's because you make the dough, and then you cook it, and then there's no preservation or anything like that, so you're just getting like the delicious pasta, and it's nice and tender. The other important part about pasta, obviously, is the sauce. And I know we talked briefly about sauces earlier. Somebody mentioned pesto. Sauce is almost as important as the pasta itself. And I know I mentioned that sauce has a lot of implications for the cultural flavors and things like that. Becky, we're going to switch to the next slide. There are really fascinating cultural traditions in Italy with respect to sauce, and the difference between northern cooking and southern cooking, and there are very strong opinions within regional Italian communities about how and what sauce should look like, both because of historical traditions and because of different climates in the north and south. Pasta sauces reflect the different ingredients and culinary traditions that are local to those regions and climates. So northern regions are more butter-based. They have rich sauces and lots of cured meats. Northern Italy is where Parmesan cheese comes from, prosciutto, and so the dishes tend to be a little bit heavier. Pasta is more common in the south, but in the north there's a more of the egg pasta and stuffed pasta, which is not very popular or common in southern cuisine. So like stuffed shells, manicotti, things like that. And those are tougher pastas. So they're a little bit more durable for things like lasagna and things like that. Southern Italian cooking, on the other hand, is a little bit different because it's probably what people more associate with traditional Italian or Mediterranean cooking. This is more based on olive oil and fresh vegetables like peppers and eggplant and certainly tomatoes, of course. And that has to do with the fact that the southern Italian climate is totally different, and there's a much greater ability for people to grow fresh produce and things like that. And so it absolutely influences and drives the sauces. And, as we said before, with the shapes of the pasta, between the combination of the pasta and the sauce, there's certainly a lot to think about as far as what types of combinations there are. But if you make a fresh pasta and you make a fresh sauce, guess what? They're both going to taste delicious, and nobody's going to come knocking down your door and saying, you can't eat that. Pasta is not only a really important cultural reflection of Italian cooking and Italian heritage, it also has some really fascinating social implications, and I just thought it would be really funny to share this because this next slide just makes me laugh, and Becky and I laughed about this. So people love pasta so much that there is actually a movement called Pastafarianism, and you have probably heard of this. And initially, this probably sounded like a silly thing, the flying spaghetti monster, who was sort of this fake deity that was kind of a parody of different religions and things like that. But it's actually grown to be a very interesting social movement. And a lot of what they do is just sort of challenge social norms and social mores around religion and government and things like that. It's largely silly, but there was a guy who ran as a Pastafarian for a political seat and won. So who knew? Pasta is not only really amazing culturally, it has the capacity to start social movements. So, I'll believe anything. But as we're talking about pasta, not a lot has actually changed that much. Becky, we're going to go to the next slide. Not that much has changed, but some things have changed. So pasta initially came to the United States during the late 19th century when a group of it came earlier than that, but it became popularized in the late 19th century. And spaghetti specifically has become a really big staple as part of the American diet, and pasta in general too. As a nation, we eat a lot of pasta, but we also have a lot of dietary issues. So there are a lot of great new things that are happening with pasta as far as ingredients go. People have really gone the extra mile to make sure that if you're not able to eat traditional wheat pasta, there are so many awesome alternatives. And so the funny thing is that even though we have all these new choices, the pasta themselves still look the same. We're still using the same techniques to make them. So as we say, old pasta, new tricks, because the pasta itself is still largely the same. But sometimes it might come in a new packaging, like it might be made out of quinoa or rice or amaranth or all different kinds of ancient grains that have become. But even though pasta has changed its look, it continues for generation and generation to prove to be something we love very much. I found this awesome YouTube channel called Pasta Grannies, and it just cracked me up so much. So it's just nothing but videos of women who are well into their 90s making some of the most amazing pasta you've ever seen. And it's just really cool because pasta is a comfort food. It's something that anybody can make. I was thinking about this when I was making some of this dough earlier today. It's very physically intensive. And this woman is 98 years old and she can do it. So I was like, all right, I think I can do it too. But it's kind of a fascinating thing because you're connected to the food physically, you're connected to the food culturally. So, there's a lot of history and passion that kind of goes into pasta making. So let's just watch this fun little clip and then we'll talk about some pasta facts and we'll do our demo.
La pasta per fare macarrone de ungia. E poi cosa devo dire?
Il suo nome.
Il nome? Giuseppa Porcu. Allora incomincio?
Sì.
First she makes the dough with semola flour and warm, salted water. Giuseppa is 95 years old and she's been making pasta for over 80 years. She is probably the oldest pasta making granny in the world.
Adesso vuole lavorata. Siccome io sono piccolina e non ce la faccio, allora mi devo mettere uno sgabello.
She's tiny, so she has to use a step to knead the dough properly.
Adesso è un po' duretta e bisogna bagnarla un pochino.
Giuseppa adds more water when necessary. She kneads with the base of her hand along the length of the dough until it is soft. She breaks a piece off and rolls it out. She places the rest under plastic to stop it from drying out. Then Giuseppe puts a special perforated piece of metal over the edge of the table. She rolls tiny pieces of pasta along it to create a shape that Sardinians call fingernails in dialect. Giuseppe is keen to show us more. Here she's making malaredus. Next, Giuseppe makes a simple tomato sauce with her homemade passata and herbs from her vegetable garden. Once the pasta is cooked, she adds grated pecorino cheese to season it. Giuseppe and her pasta are amazing.
Il piatto è pronto.
Buon appetito!
I love that. I think that's so cute. And it also shows you just how much work it is to do this. So we have some fun, quick trivia facts about pasta that I'm going to go through kind of quickly, just because I want to make sure we have enough time for our demo. But kind of dovetailing on what we just talked about, pasta at first was a luxury item. I know that we mentioned it before in one of the earlier videos, but Italy was the first place that mass production of pasta happened. But yeah, it requires a tremendous amount of labor. So each time that you make a batch of pasta dough, it has to be kneaded for 20 to 30 minutes, which is pretty physically laborious. And because of that labor, it also was what made pasta expensive. So pasta was a luxury item for that reason. And then it really wasn't until after the Industrial Revolution, when mechanical processes were invented to create large-scale production of dry pasta, that it became more affordable among common people to buy like store-bought pasta. Although most people usually in their family in Italy have a recipe that they're using, and a lot of people make their own pasta anyway. One thing that I thought was kind of fascinating from this, which is the next slide. So before machinery, I couldn't believe this. Pasta was kneaded by foot. I could not believe that. Because pasta dough is very tough, workers would walk over large batches of dough to knead it, and a single batch would take a full day's walking in order to make. But yeah, I could not believe that. Now, pasta names, there are so many of them. As I said before, there are more than 600 pasta shapes worldwide, but there are about 350 in Italian cooking. And the names are sometimes very obvious, like seashell, rooster's comb, twin brother, radish, belly button, ear. So a lot of it is just about things that are simple and quick to make, and sometimes it's just about what was around. As far as the consumption of pasta goes, I think we can obviously figure out that Italy is the #1 consumer of pasta globally. However, there are a ton of other countries that also eat a very sizable amount of pasta. The #2 country, which I was very surprised by this, is Tunisia, of all places, eats 38 pounds of pasta per year. The average Italian eats over 50 pounds of pasta per year. That's just one person. So these are per person. Venezuela came in third with 27 pounds per person. Greece came in fourth with 24 pounds per person. Chile was 20 pounds per person. And the United States came in sixth place with an average of 19 pounds of pasta eaten per person per year. So I have one more little video that I just think is so funny, and so we'll watch that really quick, and then we'll do our demo. But this is it was one of the first times that an April Fool's Day prank was used on television, and the BBC made everybody believe that spaghetti was growing on trees. So just a quick little clip, and then we'll do our demo, but I just thought this was such a hoot. So let's check this out.
It isn't only in Britain that spring this year has taken everyone by surprise. Here, in the Ticino, on the borders of Switzerland and Italy, the slopes overlooking Lake Lugano have already burst into flower, at least a fortnight earlier than usual. But what, you may ask, has the early and welcome arrival of bees and blossom to do with food? Well, it's simply that the past winter, one of the mildest in living memory, has had its effect in other ways as well. Most important of all, it's resulted in an exceptionally heavy spaghetti crop. The last 2 weeks of March are an anxious time for the spaghetti farmer. There's always the chance of a late frost, which, while not entirely ruining the crop, generally impairs the flavor and makes it difficult for him to obtain top prices in world markets. But now these dangers are over, and the spaghetti harvest goes forward. Spaghetti cultivation here in Switzerland is not, of course, carried out on anything like the tremendous scale of the Italian industry. Many of you, I'm sure, will have seen pictures of the vast spaghetti plantations in the Po Valley. For the Swiss, however, it tends to be more of a family affair. Another reason why this may be a bumper year lies in the virtual disappearance of the spaghetti weevil, the tiny creature whose depredations have caused much concern in the past. After picking, the spaghetti is laid out to dry in the warm alpine sun. Many people are often puzzled by the fact that spaghetti is produced at such uniform length, but this is the result of many years of patient endeavor by plant breeders who've succeeded in producing the perfect spaghetti. And now the harvest is marked by a traditional meal. Toasts to the new crop are drunk in these poccolinos, and then the waiters enter bearing the ceremonial dish, and it is, of course, spaghetti. Picked earlier in the day, dried in the sun, and so brought fresh from garden to table at the very peak of condition. For those who love this dish, there's nothing like real homegrown spaghetti.
Well, so we're going to learn that that's not, in fact, how pasta was made. But just a fun note, and that was, believe it or not, that was, people believe that because pasta in that time period, that was in the late 50s, I believe, was still considered extremely exotic. So when people were watching it, they did not know that it was fake. So I thought that was kind of funny. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to adjust my computer screen so you guys can see what I'm doing. But what we're going to do is I am going to do a live demonstration. Oh, and actually, Becky, we don't need this screen. I'm just going to shoot right from my camera. You guys can see what I'm seeing. Okay, and you can see what I'm seeing? Okay. So we are going to make 3 different types of pasta today. So what I'm going to show you are a couple different things. I'm going to show you how to make these little shapes. I'm going to show you how to make.
Hey Maggie, can you move it down just like an inch?
This way?
Yep. Keep going. Keep going. Keep
Better?
going.
Better?
And then turn it around because it's upside down for us.
Oh, gotcha. Yep. Sorry. There you go.
Yep. Great.
Sorry about that.
Thank
guys
you.
see that? Great. Sorry about that.
Yes.
So yeah, we're going to learn how to make these 3 different shapes today. This is l'oregatas, these are capunti, and these are orecchiette. So these are just little like ribbon strands. These are supposed to look like little pea pods, and these are little ears. And these are pretty cinchy. So I'm going to show you how to make a couple different types of dough, and this is just the best part. So we're going to make these 3. I'm just going to show you how to start this dough. I already have 2 ready-made, and I'll show you how to work those out from there. But when we're making pasta, you're going to use 2 different types of flour. You're going to use type 00 flour, and the reason why that's really important is that it's very finely ground. So you want to have a very silky texture, and then you're going to use semolina flour, and this is a little bit of a thicker cut of the pasta as far as the grind goes, and that gives.
Sorry, they're both upside down.
Oh, I'm sorry, and that gives the pasta strength. So it's a little bit of a heartier wheat flour, so that's going to give our pasta the ability to stretch and move and all that good stuff. So I'm going to start out with, I'm going to show you guys this kind of upside down, but I use a scale. I think it's extremely important in cooking. So we're going to turn our scale on and we're going to measure out our ingredients. I'm going to start us out with just a semolina and water pasta first. So all this is just semolina flour and warm water. Put in close. Okay, about 200 grams of semolina flour, and then we're going to use about 2/3 of a cup of very warm water. And the reason why the warmth of the water matters only because it just kind of helps get the dough moving a little bit. So when you're making pasta, you're going to do something kind of nifty. First of all, you want to make sure that whatever surface you're using is super clean and super dry. So I'm actually going to wipe this off just one more time to make sure. But you want to make sure this is super clean and super dry because we're going to do all of our work directly on our countertop, okay? So I'm going to pour out this semolina flour. And what we're going to do is we're going to make something called a well. And it's exactly what you think. I'm going to make a little hole here, and we are going to just put our water right into that well. And then we're going to start moving our pasta around with our water. So the reason why we're creating this little reservoir is so that we can pull our water right in there. You guys see that all right? Okay, so I'm just taking a regular kitchen fork and I'm gonna pull, I'm just gonna start gently pulling flour in here. The great news with pasta is that you really don't need to be terribly gentle. You don't need to have a deft touch, and you pretty much can't screw it up. So like even that, I'm like, oh, I broke my well. That's okay. Truly not a big deal. And all of this is all gonna get mixed together anyway, so it really doesn't matter. The other thing is that even though you're going to start off with a specific amount of measured ingredients, you may need to add a little bit of water. You may need to add a little bit of flour. Both of those things are totally fine. I can see this is a little dry, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. And all you're doing is working this until it turns into kind of a shaggy mess. And that's really the best way I can describe it. You can see some of these big chunks coming up, and that's great. That looks just exactly like what we want it to be. So you can just kind of keep adding water until it becomes inconvenient to use your fork. At which point you can immediately switch to using your hands, or I have a tool that I like very much, and I think it's very useful for lots of things, but I use something called a bench scraper, and it's just a flat edge. It also has measurements out for pastry making, but this is a nice thing that's kind of helpful to kind of bring all of our ingredients together and kind of keep them in one place. So all you do with this flour is you just bring it together, the water and the flour, until it's just a nice, it's going to have the consistency of kind of Play-Doh. So you just bring all that together, and ultimately then you're going to bring your hands in here, you're going to start working the dough. And it's not going to look that exciting. It's really not going to look that great. And that's completely normal. So this is still a little dry, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Just tighten that up a little bit. And all we want to do is just bring all this together. So once your dough has formed into a good ball, you don't want it to be too sticky, you don't want it to be too dry. You can see nothing sticking to my hands, and that's good. Once you bring all your dough together, you are going to knead this for 30 minutes. And I'm not going to do that on camera for you guys, as wonderful as that sounds, because I already did that earlier in the day. But the technique for kneading is basically what you're doing is you're creating kind of a book. So you kind of stretch your dough out a little bit, and you're going to flip it. You're just going to close it like you're closing a book, and then you're going to take the heel part of your hand and just press down as hard as you can. And you're going to do that a zillion times. Ultimately, what's going to happen is all your dough is going to come together. It's going to look amazing. And then you're going to have dough that looks like this. So after 30 minutes of kneading and then 30 minutes of rest, you're going to have a dough that resembles this. And then we can start forming this into some shapes. So let me work a couple shapes in here for you guys. And then I'm going to show you how to make one more dough with eggs. Can everybody still see everything okay? Everybody good?
Yeah, just Maggie, 10-minute warning reminder.
Yep, I see. We're good. So I'm going to take this dough, and if we want to make some shapes like these ones that I showed you guys earlier, we just want to warm our dough up a little bit. I have actually let this dough sit out so it's room temperature, and that's perfectly fine. You want your dough to be really pliable, because if it isn't, it will be really hard to form into shapes. It will crumble, it will crack. So there's nothing wrong with kneading your dough as long as your heart desires. You can't over knead this, but this has been sitting out, and so this is my semolina and water dough, and you see it's got some stretchiness to it. It's pliable. It's pretty much the texture of Play-Doh. So I think what the easiest thing to do is just cut off a small section and work with a little bit at a time. So this is, this you can see, this is a pretty sizable hunk of dough. I'm just going to take a little chunk. I'm not going to measure it. It doesn't really matter. This is really just like free pasta making, meaning there's no wrong answer here, and there wouldn't be anyway. But if we want to make these little loops, these are great, and these are really fun and easy to make. I'm pinching off a piece that's about the size of my thumb, and I'm going to roll this out like a little snake. And what you want to do is get this pretty thin, and you want to wrap this around your fingers, kind of like a piece of string. And you want this to be about the thinness of that too. I'm doing this a little bit larger for you guys so it's a little bit easier to see, but you can see I'm really rolling this out pretty thin. So I'm going to get this pretty stretched out. And then what you want to do is you want to be able to loop this around your hand 2 times, and you're going to meet these 2 edges, and you just pinch them together, and then you're going to roll the pasta. And then you get this nice, pretty ribbon shape, kind of a wreath. Really beautiful, right? So with all of your pasta, all you want to do when you're finished rolling it is you just want to transfer it to a cookie sheet with some flour and with some parchment paper on there. So I'll show you guys that one more time, but you just roll out a snake, right? Super quick. But think about this, though, when you see that grandmother making those pastas, and then you realize, like, that's how long it takes to make one pasta. So you really have to appreciate the fact that this is, really a labor of love. And I have to tell you, it just tastes phenomenal when you make it from scratch. So we're going to loop our snake around twice, meet the ends, pinch, and we're just going to twist our pasta. Pretty cool, huh? So, as you can see, you don't need any special tools or anything like that. This next one I'm going to show you, you just can use a regular knife. There's nothing special about this. This is just from my drawer at home. This is that same pinch of dough I took. I'm going to take a slightly smaller piece about the size of just my upper digit of my thumb, and I'm going to roll that into a little ball. And we're going to make these into our little ear shapes. So I'm going to take this knife, and this is the part with the edge. This is the flat edge. I'm going to take the flat edge, and I'm going to gently press that into the pasta and also drag it forward. And what this does is that creates that beautiful little edge, and you just pop it out and kind of put it over your finger almost like a little hat. Go. Ta-da! And that's your little ear. Let me show you guys that one more time. We do just a little pinch of dough, right? I know we're getting tight on time. I know we've got 5 minutes. So I'm going to show you this other one really fast, and then we'll take some questions, okay? But this is, you can see, it's a lot of work, but practice does make perfect. Pinch and roll. In order to learn how to do this for this demo, I also probably made like 1,000 of these. So just to tell you guys too, everybody needs practice. The last one that I'm going to do is super easy, and it's really elegant looking. This is just a regular chopstick. All I'm going to do is take this pasta and roll it into a little snake. And then I'm just going to very gently wrap this around here like that. And then when you let that dry, it's going to dry exactly in that shape, which is pretty cool. So that's our pasta demo. I don't have time to do the second the second dough, unfortunately. But I can send you guys a recipe. But it's essentially exactly the same as the first one, but you just use eggs instead of water. The dough that I showed you guys is definitely the one that's more practical. So if you wanted to make shapes, the dough that I just showed you guys, that's the best one to use shapes for sure. So